What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut, minimally edited podcast version of this week's episode, where we're going to have a more conversational, chit-chatty style video all about what advice I would give to my younger therapist self. There's so many things. I have touched on this in episodes in the past, what advice I wish I knew in graduate school or advice for early career therapists, but I think this isn't talked about enough. So if some things get repeated, then so be it. And it is going to be pretty chill this week since actually the week that this episode is going up, I'm going to be out of town and pretty much unavailable from being able to work. So I'm doing this episode the week prior. When I think back to my early, younger therapist self, I was just so anxious. I thought I needed to know everything. I mean, I knew I needed to not know, I couldn't know everything, but I thought like a lot of things, like some way more than is reasonable. And there was just a lot of unhealth in myself that then I think just only got kind of like magnified or perpetuated by the messaging that I received in not all, but a lot of my training contexts and early career experiences. So just in case some of that stuff is still out there, I'd love to offer this perspective to just push back against it. Well, let's just get into it. Here are some pieces of advice I would give to my younger therapist self. And I think the first one that I would share is that when it comes to our therapy work, there are just a few core concepts that matter way more than like nailing every single therapeutic approach or having like every single diagnostic criteria memorized or whatever else I was worried about. The things that really matter the most when it comes to the therapeutic relationship are unconditional positive regard, staying curious, and listening to your gut, or at least, allowing it to take up valuable space and be heard. I think if I could just have those as like my primary guiding principles, then bolstering those variables with knowledge, feedback, supervision, textbook teaching, all of that, that would have been great. I think what ended up happening instead a lot of times was I felt like I needed to know as much as is possibly knowable and beyond, have everything memorized, implement everything perfectly. And what happened for me is a lot of times because I was so caught up in getting all those things right, the implementation and memorization of things just right, is sometimes I would forget about staying curious. I would forget about just being with my clients in that unconditional positive regard and just sharing the caring space together. And yeah, sometimes I didn't listen to my gut. I would be in situations that were honestly potentially dangerous in a lot of my training contexts. And I just kind of pushed through because I thought that's what you're supposed to do as a grown-up. And I was like 21. So I thought, well, I'm a grown-up now, so deal with it. Now looking back, I was in some really compromising situations and boundaries would have been good. Listening to your gut doesn't just apply to dangerous situations. Certainly it includes those, but it could also be listening to your gut like, hey, maybe we're doing this therapeutic intervention and we've been on this like treatment plan for a while, but now that I'm hearing this client talk about something inside of me is just kind of feeling like this isn't the thing that's the highest priority right now. There's maybe this other concern that is worth considering exploring first, right? That's also part of listening to your gut. And along the same lines, the next piece of advice I'd give to my younger therapist self is that you don't have to know all of the therapeutic techniques and strategies, certainly not by the time you graduate and not ever. Now I use more of a framework of seeing like all these therapeutic interventions, techniques as supporting the therapy work as a whole. The therapy work itself isn't just a bunch of correctly applied interventions, because if you don't have a strong supportive therapeutic relationship, even if you implemented that therapeutic technique just perfectly, it might not do anything. It's probably not going to be very effective. The next piece of advice I would tell my younger therapist self isn't even advice. It's just data. It's data I didn't have and wish I did. But that's that early career therapists are just as effective, if not more effective, than experienced therapists on average. Why didn't they teach me this in graduate school? Was that somebody's sensitive ego? I don't know. If you've never heard about this, I will reference a study that had this finding, though I think this has been replicated multiple times. The study that I'm referencing is titled, "Do Psychotherapists Improve with Time and Experience? A Longitudinal Analysis of Outcomes in a Clinical Setting," published in the Journal of Counseling Psychology in 2016. Here's a quote from the discussion section of that article. Quote, "The present study, which to our knowledge is the first large-scale longitudinal examination of therapist professional development over time using patient outcomes, involved 170 therapists treating over 6,500 patients over an extended period of time, on average almost 5 years. Therapy was generally effective in this real-world setting, with pre-treatment to post-treatment standardized effects of approximately 1 standard deviation, which is comparable to effects achieved in clinical trials. At the same time, the present analyses show that, in the aggregate, therapists did not improve with more experience, operationalized as either time or number of cases. Indeed, results suggest that therapists on the whole became slightly less effective over time, although the magnitude of the deterioration was extremely small. The magnitude of the pre-treatment to post-treatment effect size diminished 0.012 each year, which is a very small effect. Each year, it would be expected that only 1 fewer out of 148 patients would have had a successful outcome on average." The nerdy data backs it up, okay? In your early career days, on average, you are just as effective, if not slightly more effective, than you will be when you have more experience. So own that. Like, just what you're doing is probably pretty good work. I wish I knew that early on, because I just thought I was just, I thought so little of myself early on. Just thought I knew nothing and deferred to authority figures. And now looking back, I'm like, yeah, no, the authority figures didn't necessarily offer better treatment than I did. They might have had more knowledge about certain things than I did, and that was worth respecting and gleaning from. But the treatment I was offering my clients from early on was likely, based on statistics, just as effective as what my supervisors were offering. And maybe a little bit more effective. Okay. Maybe I wasn't taught that because people have a little bit fragile egos. Is that what's going on there? Okay. Well, we should teach this in schools. I think that should be just a blanket understood fact about therapy. Moving on. The next piece of advice that I give to my younger self as a therapist is that taking care of yourself, therapist, is literally always the most important thing. And it's not selfish. It's not denying your clients care. It's not denying your other loved ones either. It's putting your oxygen mask on first so that you have what you need to put the oxygen mask on others next. If you don't put on your oxygen mask on first, then you are very quickly going to run out of resources if you are frantically putting on everybody else's oxygen mask. I think so often there is this kind of extreme polarized view of self-care amongst therapists prioritizing your own care, where either people see it as like, yeah, I need to give of myself sacrificially until I run out of steam, because the only alternative is that I'm just selfishly taking and being greedy. But I would argue that even from a fully selfless point of view, if your goal was to support as many people as possible, make as significant of an impact on others as possible, taking care of yourself as best as you can is your best ticket for doing so. Because not only in the oxygen mask example would you lose oxygen metaphorically very quickly if you're not wearing your oxygen mask yet, and so therefore you cannot help others, but also if we are working ourselves into the ground without taking care of ourselves, showing up with our clients, and we're supposed to be helping them take care of themselves, even if they don't ever see behind the curtain of what's really going on in our lives, we're effectively living a life that's completely mismatched from what we're advocating our clients do in their lives. So, I wish I was taught that. So yeah, my advice to my younger self is like, take care of yourself absolutely as much as possible. And yeah, to this day, anytime I opt away from like the pull of like, I should be doing more, I should be seeing more clients, I should be giving more, when I instead respond to that by saying like, yeah, but I can tell that I really need something for me right now, and I opt to do that thing for me, which often is not like earth shattering. Like, it's not like I'm taking 5 months off from work. It's like, oh, I'm gonna spend 15 minutes like walking outside instead of learning that like extra little tidbit that I could have learned from revisiting the DSM one more time about that client. I don't know. It's usually go outside and get some fresh air. Like, and no harm done. You lost out on 15 minutes of something else you might have been working on. And honestly, you're going to have more energy. And so you'll get more stuff done anyway. You can come back to that thing later, you know? All right. Another piece of advice that I am kind of bracing has a little bit of a controversial edge to it is that no, you do not have to spill your emotional guts all over the place in your training years, in grad school, in every supervision or consult group. You don't always have to be revealing the deepest, most vulnerable parts of yourself in all of your training or teaching or kind of consultation type spaces. This piece of advice blatantly goes against what I was overtly taught in graduate school, which was that we needed to not only work through our deepest dynamics, problems, pains, concerns, but we needed to actively do it like in our process papers that we were turning in to our professors, who sometimes were people that I did not find to be very safe people, or our supervisors, who sometimes I found were not particularly safe people for me. And I still opted to lean in to always spilling my emotional guts, always digging deeper. And there's an issue there, I think, where if we are expected to always reveal what we're working through in this somewhat public format, it has the potential to be very damaging. Now, on the flip side, I do think in a lifelong way, we should always be working to not only take care of ourselves, but seek to better understand some of the dynamics that we have at play that we're bringing to the table as therapists. We all have them, whatever our deep-seated concerns, patterns, unhealth, all of that is, but we should seek to do so only in the spaces where we choose and where we feel safe to do so. And honestly, in my opinion, most of the time, or at least sometimes, like school and supervision and consult groups are not always the safe place to do that. In fact, sometimes they are actively very unsafe. I feel the sense that that's controversial only because I was very actively taught to always pour our hearts out in our papers and everything. And I don't know, maybe that was just my schooling or the era I was trained in or something, but seek out safe spaces to do that. But just you get to consent to it when you decide and when you feel safe. And you don't have to dig up your deepest stuff in your school papers, even if that's what your professor asked you to do. Before we get into the next piece of advice I'd give my younger therapist self, I'd like to thank Powbox for sponsoring this episode. Based on a poll that I put out last year, only 1/4 of therapists are confident that the email they're using is HIPAA secure. That means that 3 out of 4 therapists listening to this ad right now either aren't using HIPAA secure email or aren't sure if it's HIPAA secure. In 2023, I made the switch to Powbox, and it's been smooth sailing since. Powbox is the simplest, most effective solution for mental health professionals to seamlessly integrate HIPAA security into our email, all while using our favorite email provider. It's just running smoothly and quietly in the background, keeping any potential space invaders from interfering with your emails. If you'd like to check out Powbox for yourself, they're offering Private Practice Skills listeners a special discount. Just use coupon code SKILLS at checkout to get $250 off your first year with Powbox. Thank you again to Powbox for sponsoring this episode, and now back to some of that advice. Another piece of advice I would share with my younger therapist self is It is totally normal to have triggers. Everybody does somewhere. Maybe some of us have a longer list of them or it happens more often, but everyone has triggers. And I used to be of the belief that I needed to eliminate every single trigger. And now looking at that concept, it's so inhuman. And it is very human to have triggers, and it's more valuable to understand what those are. Sure, work on those for our own care and benefit. But I used to have this perception that I should be able to work with pretty much any type of client, regardless of my triggers. And I don't think that way at all anymore. If I have trigger points and I have a certain client that brings up something that pokes at those triggers, it's much better, in my opinion, for me to refer that client to somebody who can be far more present to them than I can be, because I'm getting triggered. And I can keep working on that trigger, but I don't have to keep seeing that client while I'm working on it. Like, that doesn't feel fair to me or the client. One pattern that I noticed as I was coming up with this list of like pieces of advice I'd give to my younger self is most of them are things that we typically would advocate for our therapy clients. But somehow as a profession, we haven't held ourselves to the same standard that we hold our clients to, right? Having appropriate boundaries when there's a trigger and discerning when we need to face the trigger because it aligns with something that's important to us or it's unavoidable or something like that, versus saying like, hey, maybe today doesn't have to be the day that I face that trigger. I can have boundaries with it, and that can be part of advocating for your own care. That's something we do with our clients, or at least I do with my clients, and I think it's appropriate to advocate for that for ourselves as well. Okay, another piece of advice I'd give my younger therapist self is to take other therapists' money-related advice with a grain of salt. They are probably giving advice based on their specific individual experience, which is relevant, but may not necessarily be universal. I've seen this happen a lot, both through direct experience and through hearsay of what I hear from other therapists, that when therapists speak to other therapists about money-related things, rather than speaking as an individual and claiming your own experience, we tend to generalize our experiences with money. So rather than saying, for example, I've been having trouble generating the kind of income that I'd hoped for as a therapist, folks will end up saying things that sound more like, if you're a therapist, then you can't really make a livable income. Some other examples of this type of like generalism around money that I often hear claimed by other therapists are things like, you can't really make money in private practice, you can't fill your private practice with private pay clients, or you shouldn't be a therapist if you want to make a decent amount of money. And well, if all of those things are true, then I'm screwed, because none of them are true for me. So I might be the outlier. I can accept that maybe that's not most people, but it's not fair to generalize that and say like, well, I already know because this is what happened to me. So just know that like somebody's speaking from their experience. And another item that I want to mention that I want to be like a little sensitive as I say it, because I don't want to make a generalization that's not true, is I've come to realize now that I've been out of graduate school for a long time that like who your professors are and the supervisors and people who are involved in your training years may not necessarily represent the average therapist's experience. Again, there are going to be exceptions to that, but like on average, like the people who are your professors, they may not represent the average therapist's experience because it's a specific, like self-selected group of people who become professors. And I've learned now that I'm on the other side, generally being a professor is wildly underpaid and overworked. So sending all my heart emojis to you if you are in this profession, working as a professor and feeling that. But yeah, it may not just represent, the experience of the average therapist, I guess. Another piece of advice that I would give my younger self as a therapist is that yes, you are probably becoming a therapist, at least in part because of some unworked through deep-seated childhood dynamics. And you know what? It's okay. It's okay. It's okay if you don't understand all of it yet. You can still hold yourself to a standard of always prioritizing your client care, making sure you also put your oxygen mask on first and all of that. And you can learn and grow as a person in your understanding of these kind of deep-seated dynamics of like what caused you to be a therapist over time. As I was thinking of this piece of advice, I was reminded of a conversation I had when I applied to a job that ended up being my postdoc placement. And I think the people there were quite gracious in receiving the answer that I gave, because I think they asked something about like what childhood dynamics might have led me to become a therapist. And my personal story is one where my childhood dynamics very much clearly influenced my desire to become a therapist, because I had very severe panic disorder in high school. I worked through systematic desensitization to overcome it. And then I was hooked. I was sold from age 14. I was like, I want to do this for other people because this was incredible. It was transformative. It was amazing. I want to share it with the world. So at that point, when I was in that job interview sharing the story, and they were saying, well, what do you think might have been going on that contributed to you developing panic disorder? I had one answer, which probably had a degree of truth to it. I mean, it definitely had a degree of truth to it, because I developed panic disorder because I had undiagnosed celiac disease. I had a very severe form of celiac disease. Medical providers were saying that it was psychological. I was making it up. I was attention seeking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, my symptoms of celiac disease were very severe. I was very malnourished. I was having trouble functioning physically. And I had also developed a fear of eating because eating was so painful. So in a very simplified view, I traced back my panic disorder to the pain that I experienced, which was very real, when I ate food. And so I developed this relationship with food where I became fearful of it. And then it just started to expand, where I would have panic attacks. And then I became afraid of the panic attacks. And y'all know how this works because you're therapists. It really spiraled into full-blown panic disorder. That is true. I think that's true. But also, at that point, when I was interviewing for my postdoc at 25, I had not yet come to discern the extent and degree of just narcissistic abuse that I grew up with, and how incredibly impactful that was on me as a person. It was so impactful that I couldn't see it, I didn't realize how bad it was yet. And now looking back, perhaps I might have still developed panic disorder to the degree that I did. I definitely would have still had celiac disease, and probably with the same degree of symptoms that I did. But I was anxious. I was always anxious, and it was always anxiety around like, don't mess up and make sure you're good enough. And all of these things that very clearly are also stemming from, my system's response to this chronic narcissism in my life. So that was a long-winded side story to say, like, yeah, I had so much pressure in grad school. I felt so much pressure, at least, that I needed to like develop full awareness of like, these are all the dynamics at play in my life that are contributing to like everything, including why I'm a therapist, and I understand it and I grasp it, and like, look how well I grasp it. And that pressure is almost like detrimental to the cause, to say like, life is an ever evolving dynamic process. We can always gain new understandings about even our own experiences from a long time ago. We might understand new layers of it as we go. And to me, that is such a beautiful part of the work that we do with our clients, is that, people are always growing and evolving, are always capable of growing and evolving. And that includes us as therapists. So we don't have to have it all figured out. We can just hold ourselves to our ethical standards. Like, looking back, I think I was still providing good care, even though I hadn't unearthed all this stuff. And I'm so grateful that I can continue to grow. And me in 10 years might look back at me now and be like, oh yeah, she didn't grasp just yet this, that, and the other. And I wouldn't ever want that to negate like how valuable the work is that we're doing while we're still sorting through these things. That's just humanity. That's normal. Okay. Another piece of advice I'd give is just because somebody is a boss, a supervisor, a professor, a superior in any form, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're offering great therapy. I don't even want to unpack this fully right now, but if I had just understood that, just because somebody is in a position of authority over me, it doesn't necessarily mean that they always know better. That would have saved me a lot of energy and just a lot. Trying to hear me growing up from my narcissistic dynamic past, trying to please my professors, that now looking back, some of those professors were really awful. Not all of them, but yeah, I would always be doubling down on the ones that they weren't awful because I wasn't good enough. They were just like that with everyone. Not only did I double down on trying to please somebody because, probably because of that narcissistic past that I described, but I thought that maybe I was missing something. This person must know better, that they are treating their clients this way, or they're advocating for me to interact with my clients a certain way, or they're just interacting with me a certain way. Maybe I'm just being sensitive because they must be a great therapist because they're my supervisor, my professor, right? And yeah, it goes back to trusting your gut. I would have these moments where I'm like, oh, I don't like that. And my reaction to that used to always be okay, well, Marie, get over it because they must know what they're doing. And now I look back at it and it's no, I still don't like that. I don't do that now. I don't like that. If somebody did that to me now, I would let them know in a professional and tactful way that this isn't appropriate, right? But I didn't have that voice then as a younger therapist. So that anyway, we could get into dynamics of somebody in a position of power. That's not what this episode's about. But you know what? Just let it be what it is. Just because somebody is a superior in some form doesn't necessarily mean that they offer great therapy. It doesn't necessarily mean that they know what's best for you either. And my last piece of advice, at least for this episode, is that you don't have to like all your clients. I used to see it as something negative about my countertransference. It certainly is countertransference, but it's normal and human to not like somebody. So it's more helpful to notice it again with curiosity, still positive regard and listening to your gut and curiosity that we talked about at the beginning, but to say, oh, that's really interesting. I'm having this response to my client. I wonder what that's about. And not oh, Marie, you don't like your client. What's wrong with you? It's, oh, there's something going on here that when you put the two of us together, I'm having this response where I'm not liking this person or I'm not liking our interactions. And that could tell me something about me or my client or our therapeutic interaction together. But all of the above are fine. If there's nothing wrong as a therapist if you don't like your client. Of course, what you do with that is far more important. And obviously, you still need to take care of your client well, even if you don't like them. Well, I hope this episode felt supportive to you, even if you're, not a younger therapist or earlier in your career. I hope you just found it supportive and validating. I wish we talked about more of these things, and I am aware that I can be quite sensitive and lean anxious. So I'm hoping that some of these things are Marie things that I've needed to learn as I've gone. But I have a feeling that there might be others as well who've shared some similar experiences and might be helped by hearing some of this advice. So if that's you, sending all the heart emojis your way. Well, thanks for hanging with me this week. I had a smaller window to record, so I think maybe even the extended cut might be slightly shorter than my typical. Hope you don't mind, but I hope this was supportive to you. Let me know in the comments what items you would add as far as advice you'd give to your younger therapist self, because I know I didn't cover all of it. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.